The witnesses have accidentally benefited us all by looking out for their own rights. In looking out for their own rights, they've protected all of us. But you can't say that they've been selfish in this regard. The fact that the witnesses choose, because it's a tenet of their faith, not to participate in civic society in some ways, and yet still take advantage of the courts, isn't something I think that can be held against them. The benefits of American citizenship are an option to vote, an option to participate in the political process. And the guarantee of the Bill of Rights is effectively an anti-majoritarian guarantee, that the small, the weak, the unpopular, and the oppressed hold certain rights that the entire nation, voting to a man, can't take away from them by virtue of the democratic process. That they have done such good anti-majoritarian work, I think, is greatly to their credit. They too have played their role. You can't discriminate on the basis of message. If you tried to stop the Jehovah's Witnesses from knocking at your door, you'd have to stop everyone from knocking at your door, and suddenly political discourse would fall silent. Again, it's the poor, the disenfranchised, the poorly organized, who have as a means of last resort for unpopular political messages, knocking at doors, walking in the streets, preaching on the sidewalk, collecting petitions. In an age of focus-grouped media messages, in an age of spin, when everything is very carefully put together for public consumption, I think we need to be especially aware of the poignancy and the salience of people who are willing to go out and walk from door to door to articulate something that they believe with a fervor in their heart will drive them to do that. We can't shut down that last most important aspect of democratic participation, because at the end of the day, whether you're dealing with national or international politics, whether you're a group of Palestinian women protesting outside a federal courthouse in Youngstown, Ohio, or somebody who just wants to change a local ballot initiative, that's really what's left to people, and it does matter. Having to tolerate someone coming up to your front door and delivering a message that's unwelcome, at least until you politely close the door and say, please go away, may be an inconvenience, but there are lots of inconveniences we tolerate to live in a free society. It might be easier and more comfortable if nobody came to your door, but if you're going to sacrifice that right, then you've got to sacrifice the concomitant right to deliver the message on your own. Stratton is an interesting case because it comes like a runner handing off the baton in a relay race. In some sense, it partakes of all of the old First Amendment cases of the 1930s, door-to-door solicitation and an unpopular message. But it contains in its opinion the seed of an idea which is very new and quickly catching currency, this notion of anonymous speech, especially important in the context of an anonymous and burgeoning internet where there are very low barriers to publication. The ability to speak anonymously, the ability to communicate an idea which might seem so radical and so dangerous that even its most committed proponents aren't willing to put their name on it just yet, is a very important notion, not just in this country, but in countries where political oppression and political violence are very real facts of everyday life. The fact that the Supreme Court is willing to recognize in 2002 that sort of anonymity, which played such an important role in 1776, is still important, is, I think, going to be the ultimate legacy of this case. It ties the old, the door-to-door solicitation, to the new, the right to speak anonymously and to be judged on your message. Here, the Jehovah's Witnesses and everyone else who would have sought to communicate door-to-door in Stratton was required to disclose their identity to not only the mayor, not only the city officials, but to any homeowner who inquired of it as a precondition of speaking. Now, the Supreme Court previously has only touched on this 3 times, but in each case, 1962, again in the 80s, and recently in the early 90s, it's indicated that when you have the champion of an unpopular cause, forcing them to disclose their identity before speaking is necessarily a form of chill. It causes people to censor themselves. It may cause people who fear for their safety not to enter the arena at all. And as a result, it keeps some ideas out of the marketplace. That's why the Stratton Ordinance, which directly attacked anonymity, was particularly dangerous from a First Amendment point of view. After September 11th, anonymous speech and all the political freedoms that we have held dear are more important than ever. We are living in a time when the government is taking what some perceive to be radical and draconian steps against some traditional American freedoms in the name of national security. More than ever, that needs to be discussed. More than ever, controversial ideas about the appropriate role and the scope of government need to be discussed. And more than ever, people are afraid to ascribe their names to them. The ideas should rise or fall on their own merits. You know, there is no tyrant, there is no foreign genius, there is no foreign power that has either the strength militarily or ideologically to take away our freedoms. If we lose our liberties after September 11th, we will have sacrificed them ourselves, and we will be to blame. That's why the defense of ideas like anonymous speech are particularly important after September 11th. At a time when people are frightened, at a time when people aren't sure of what it is appropriate to say and not to say, it's important to protect their ability to say what must be said. Here, then, you have in a small town in Pennsylvania 2 teenage children unwilling to recite the Pledge of Allegiance. They are expelled. And the Supreme Court says, yes, that's fine. They have stood in opposition to such a minimal requirement of collective patriotism that nothing in the laws or the Constitution has to protect them. Well, then it does become open season. Then lynch mobs across the country, literally, in as many as 44 states, attack kingdom halls of the Jehovah's Witnesses, burn them down, in one case castrate a member of the witnesses, in another actually surround a group of witnesses and force them by stoning them to recite the Pledge of Allegiance. It's every bit as ugly as the Kristallnacht. It's every bit as ugly as what's going on across the Atlantic in Germany at the time. And yet, ironically, it's being upheld in the name of Americanism and patriotism. So 3 years later, when the court seems to catch its breath and to see these ugly parallels, it takes the dramatic step of reversing itself and saying, this isn't a country in which you can equate patriotism with forced allegiance to the state. This is a country whose constitution and whose composition intellectually is unique in that you can't equate patriotism with forced professions of allegiance. That's Americanism. And that's a step in the right direction that the witnesses helped us to take. Anytime there's a perceived foreign threat to the security of this country, patriotism becomes something that seems to be mandatory. Every country has a flag. Every country has territory. Every country has a national anthem. This country has a Bill of Rights. And at the end of the day, I think that's what makes us different. And at the end of the day, that's what makes us better. When you have a decision like West Virginia against Barnett, which recognizes at the height of a national crisis that what makes America worth fighting for is that we're not the kind of country that forces its children to raise their arms in a salute to the flag every morning, that that's our strength, that that's what makes this country worth defending. That is, I think, more basis for patriotism than all the flags and all the banners and all the songs you could ever wrap up, because that recognizes that what's fundamentally different and what's fundamentally better about America is a commitment to individual freedom. That's worth defending. And that makes the witnesses, in some sense, true patriots.